President of the Millennial Action Project and a proud Badger, Stephen Olacara, our moderator for today's panel.
All right, more later. Hello.
The only thing I'm going to do is take a seat with the water there.
Hello, Politicon. How are we feeling today? All right, so this is the perfect venue to have a panel discussion on how the F are we going to get along in this country, and starting here at Politicon. So we've got a great roster of panelists today. I want you to give a big Politicon welcome to all of our panelists. Let's bring them out. Sir?
I got the audience packed. Stop it. You're going to make me blush. Come on.
Thank you.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir.
I want to go over here.
Thanks, buddy. Oh, I didn't need to yell that.
No.
All right, so some quick introductions here. First of all, to my far right, we have Kyle Kulinski. He is the co-founder. He brought a few friends. Kyle's the co-founder of Justice Democrats and host of Secular Talk on the Young Turks Network. To his left, we have Bakari Sellers, who is a former state representative in South Carolina, now a CNN contributor. To his left, we have the roaming millennial, AKA Lauren Chen, and she is the host of Roaming Millennial Uncensored on YouTube. And then to my left, we have Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show on the Daily Wire. And to his left, we have Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA. So just to frame this discussion for a second here, we obviously live in very polarized times today. Our political rhetoric is as divisive as it's been probably in our lifetimes. And just to put a finer point on the level of polarization today, studies have shown that the levels of partisanship, partisan polarization in Congress are at the widest they've been since the end of Reconstruction. And you only have to look to the headlines in this country to see just how divided this country is. And I think, in my view, that partisanship has really metastasized into tribalism today. So I hope with the panel we can talk about how we do bridge the political divide in a media environment where it's very difficult to do it. And I think all of our panelists here are on the cutting edge of new media. And so it's really going to be on the folks here to figure out how we can create a more constructive political dialogue. And so I actually want to start with Bakari because you have transitioned from a governance role, having served in the state legislature of South Carolina. You were the nominee for lieutenant governor was it 2014? 2014. And so you were in the business of trying to form legislation and work with both Democrats and Republicans in the legislature. And then you transitioned to a commentating role at CNN and a number of other platforms. So tell us more about that transition, that process, and the change in incentives that you found in terms of the type of political dialogue that would get attention and that would work.
Well, first, thank you for the question. Thank you all for being here. I was very young when I ran for office, and so I know we have some people in here on the left and the far left. I know we have some people in here on the right and the far right. But I firmly believe that we're not the generation of tomorrow, we're the generation of now. And so I encourage everyone here. When I was 21 years old, I announced my race for office. I ran against somebody who was 82 years old and had been in office for 26 years. And on June 13, 2006, I became the youngest black elected official in the United States and the youngest state legislator. But the reason that I was able to do that is because regardless of how someone looked, regardless of where someone came from or their zip code, I always gave people the benefit of their humanity. And I think if we start there, if we meet people where they are, then we can find initiatives that all of us can agree on. To have Charlie to my left and to have my good friend from the Young Turks to my right, I can honestly say that if we were to put forth an idea like making sure that we take redistricting, which is the reason that we're so polarized today, out of the hands of elected officials and made them independent commissions statewide, then I can actually get these two to agree on that and push it in state legislatures around the country. But it takes those type of bold steps. It takes people not getting caught up in petty differences. And it also takes people understanding the practical reality of where we are in this country. I tell people we've made a lot of progress, but we still have yet a ways to go.
Yeah. Well, just to pick up on that issue of gerrymandering and the importance of our generation, a lot of people don't realize this, but in the state of Ohio this year, I run a nonpartisan organization called the Millennial Action Project. We work with young elected officials across the aisle, and it was the young lawmakers in Ohio who pushed a bipartisan plan to put in place redistricting reform in Ohio to get rid of partisan gerrymandering, and it passed with wide bipartisan support. The voters approved it with 75% of the vote, and I think that just underscores the opportunity our generation has to transcend some of the old divides that have been holding our country back. And since you called out Charlie, I want to move over to Charlie here. You've been working on college campuses across the country. What's the sense that you're picking up from college students today in terms of the type of rhetoric that they're looking for? When I go to college campuses, for example, I hear so many young people who say, I'm so tired of the partisanship. I'm so tired of all the gridlock. And I'm curious if you hear a similar thing and how folks in Turning Point are responding to that.
I agree with that. I think the good news politically about our generation is I think we agree generally on the problems. We have a lot of different perspectives on how we would go about solving them. The broad-based consensus amongst college students and millennials is that we have a government that does not represent our generation, that is run by trial lawyers, lobbyists, well-connected people around a 90-mile proximity of Washington, D.C. Our argument as conservative libertarians is, well, if that government has been bought and is corrupt, why on earth would you want to make that government bigger, stronger, and send more of your money to that very same government? And that's obviously where my progressive friends would disagree. So the broad-based question here over the last 30 to 40 years is why has the wealth, power, money, and influence concentrated around our nation's capital? What do they create? Well, they create nothing. They create access to power. I mean, the wealthiest counties in America used to be around Detroit, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, 8 out of the 10 wealthiest counties in America are around Washington, D.C., where you're literally rewarded how close you are to the power center. And for us to get away from that, I think there are some solutions that I would actually tend to agree with, whether it be fair maps, so on and so forth. But I think our generation is looking for a series of policies and ideas that will, I think, address in a, not necessarily, I hate that term bipartisan because it almost lends itself to that both Republicans and Democrats are the answer. I would say, in some way, it's bigger than partisan issues in some ways. And if you follow what I say closely, I think that until the Republican Party is honest with ourselves, with the failures of our own party over the last 30, 40 years, such as George W. Bush was a big spending liberal that betrayed all of our principles time and time again, we're not going to be able to actually appropriate, solutions that will increase freedom and shrink government and put the same government that's bought by these corrupt lobbyists and insiders back to the people.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Charlie, I want to now go over to Kyle here because you made the point about this widening gap between Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country, not only in terms of power, but also in terms of now income. And I've heard this divide in America reframed particularly after the 2016 election. It's not so much between left versus right, it's really kind of the haves and the have-nots. I know this is an issue that you've talked about. What can we do to bridge that sort of divide?
Well, I want to just take a step back real quick and say I actually, surprisingly, agree with a lot of what Charlie Kirk said. And he made a point to bring up, the size of government and how perhaps we have some large disagreements on that. Well, I actually want to reach out and say maybe there are many areas where we totally agree on the size of government. So when it comes to, for example, warrantless NSA spying, if you tell me, hey man, listen, I hate big government, I don't want it intervening in my life in that realm, well, I say, you're goddamn right, and let's work together to try to get rid of warrantless NSA spying.
FISA courts, I agree with you. Totally.
Good. So I'm happy to hear that. And there's other areas too, like the drug war, for example. That's giant government, and it ruins people's lives when they throw them in prison for smoking weed or something like that. And I would even go as far as to say, there's a lot of agreement between what I would call the populist left and the libertarian right. So Rand Paul, for example, he's relatively consistent in an anti-war stance. And of course, if you're pro-war, you are pro-big government by definition. Because,
totally.
Right, so if you're anti-war, I'm anti-war too, and we can agree on that. That'd be wonderful.
I think war's a horrible thing, yes.
Okay, so now we just both ruined our careers because we agreed on something.
Well, we both have principles, so that's, and we
Okay, I'm
both
glad
parties.
to hear that, man. The only point where I disagree is I don't think George W. Bush was a liberal. I think he was a warmonger and a neoconservative and one of the worst presidents the country's ever seen.
Okay, but let me add context to it. Medicare Part D, borrowing $8 trillion.
That was private,
No
though.
child left behind.
But
Let's
expanding every government agency and
let's not
bureaucracy.
digress on George W. Bush.
We were having this wonderful kumbaya moment, so I hate to ruin it by talking about George W. Bush's big government tendencies. But he did grow the size of government tremendously. He created a new government agency, Department of Homeland Security, of which you'd put more under a traditional left-wing, worldview.
But it's what were the priorities when he grew government, and when you spend $7 trillion on the war in Iraq, that's what is projected to be by 2053, that's not a left-wing priority. It was the left who was standing, it was Bernie Sanders who voted against the war in Iraq.
All right, I'm going to bring in Lauren here. So we were talking before this panel about the incentives involved in having an online TV show. And I personally struggle with the incentives on social media generally, including YouTube, because the most inflammatory rhetoric gets the most views, the most retweets, the most followers. And so I'm curious from your perspective, having run a very successful online show, how do you have a constructive conversation when the incentives seem to be pushing you in the opposite direction?
Well, that is something that I'm always struggling with, and it actually came up about in our fake news panel yesterday. Someone asked one of the journalists that was there, why aren't we talking more about the big issues here, places where there's genocide and starvation? Why are these fake news headlines getting so much attention? And she gave the very frank answer, that's what people are attracted to, and it doesn't matter whether we publish the other stories or not. It's not what's getting shared, and as an independent creator, you're very aware of that fact. We can spend weeks researching a video about something like political philosophy or the public school system, and it'll get a fraction of the views that some wrecked feminist ownage video will get. And it's kind of frustrating, but at the same time, I'm trying to look at it in the way that at least people are getting involved in these issues. And my hope is if they see something that's maybe a little bit sensationalized and radicalized, not that I agree with doing anything purposely provocative just to upset people, but maybe then they'll stick around for a little bit of the deeper conversation. Maybe then they'll start to realize, all right, well, why is that happening? And hopefully, at the very least, it can lead to a deeper conversation. It's not going to be everybody. Some people just like the outrage machine. But there are a lot of people who are going to stick around maybe for the deeper conversation.
Right. And Michael, you have an online show as well. Say more about the incentives that you've seen from your experience.
Well, what I find is that people reward authenticity. Audiences reward authenticity. You cannot pretend to be something you're not. Audiences are not going to turn up. And that's why I hate to break up our kumbaya feelings here. I love the polarization. I love it. I love the partisanship. I spent a long time researching a book that I wrote called Reasons to Vote for Democrats.
It's quite thorough, by the way.
Very thorough book. I love it. I want a choice, not an echo. I don't want mealy-mouthed kumbaya. I don't want any of that. I want to know when I'm voting who I'm voting for. In the 1930s and 40s, one of the major complaints of political scientists was that the parties were indistinguishable. You had, on issues, anything ranging from life to taxes to death, whatever. People having unclear points of view. Now I know on all of those issues, on the size of government, on the role of government, on socialism, on life, on marriage, on death, on everything, I know where the parties stand. That's the country that I want to live in. It gives me a choice, not an echo. The conservative movement was founded in this. How do we get along? I have a simple answer. We win and you lose. And that might seem a little harsh. That might seem a little harsh. But there is no, to quote Ronald Reagan, St. Gipper, there is no choice between freedom and slavery. These are not morally equivalent. When one party has elected leaders saying that we should go to Republicans' homes where their children sleep, we should physically mob around them, though there is not a moral equivalence to some harsh rhetoric from little old me on my internet show. Those are not the same thing. I'm glad that there is a difference now, and that is my, maybe that'll be the sequel to my bestseller. All of the reasons to vote for Democrats Part 2. We win, you lose.
So I want to just pick up on that real fast, and I'll let you get it. Well, just 1 second. So, hold on. I think it's, in a democracy we need choices.
Yes.
That's right. And
pro-choice, you might say.
Well said. But I think the issue that we're trying to pick up on here is not that having diverse views is bad, but a zero-sum politics in which one side wins at the expense of the other side, and that's the only way that we frame issues that has a destructive effect.
How could one side win not at the expense of the other side? On the question of life, we've been talking about Roe versus Wade a lot because of the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. On the question of life, how does one side win without the other side lose? You're talking about protecting the life of an unborn baby or snuffing out the life of an unborn baby. I don't see a compromise there. I don't see a conciliation on that issue.
I agree that the question of life is probably you've specifically chosen an example that's hard to bridge.
No, it's a bullshit talking point because of the fact that what we're doing is we're finding these hyper-sensationalized metrics by which to measure how we vote for people. But what we're talking about is how do we improve individuals' lives? And yes, you're going to have individuals like Tim Kaine, for example, who abides by his belief, who is very, very much pro-life, who is a Democrat, but he votes in a manner that's reflective of Virginia.
Did you just say that Tim Kaine is pro-life?
Tim Kaine is pro-life.
No, he's
Tim
not.
Kaine supports legal abortion.
First of all, that's what that's literally what I just said. I said, but he votes his constituency in Virginia. But what I'm trying to do is move the conversation beyond this conversation of life, because that's where we get bogged down.
Exactly. But let's actually,
my only point to you is that, listen, we can talk about, if we want to just sit here and we want to have a discussion that goes nowhere, we can talk about issues of life where we probably will disagree. We can talk about issues of race where we probably will disagree. But let's actually talk about something substantive that we can probably find common ground on, like how do we make sure that people have health care in this country? How do we make sure that kids get properly educated in this country? Because what I will not do is waste time on discussions that people just we continue to have these same discussions and sensationalize it so people get clicks. This is not a click.
That's right.
I'm glad to know that you guys are against the death penalty. I just want to say that. You're so pro-life, so you're against the death penalty.
I'm against the death penalty.
I love the death penalty.
I'm not going
to. So you're not pro-life.
I'm with blessed.
So you're not pro-life. So you're not pro-life.
I love the death.
So you're not pro-life.
No, I'm pro-life.
No, but
I think the
he just did it. Catch it.
Okay, I'm going to put Charlie.
Good on you for being principled.
Hold on, I'm going to get Charlie.
I'm pro-life, and I'm also pro-due process, which unfortunately one political party in this country has abandoned.
So then you're against Guantanamo Bay. So then you're against Guantanamo Bay.
But let's just cut through the talking points, because
if you're for due process, you're against Gitmo.
Guys.
If you're for due process, you're against Guantanamo Bay.
No, I'm for due process for American citizens. I'm not for due process for terrorists who fight in violation of the Geneva Convention.
All right, guys, I'm going to step in here.
Undermining the Geneva Convention protections themselves.
I'm going to step in here.
This is going to be easy if he keeps walking right into the trap like that.
So, Charlie, I didn't want. Were you going to say?
No, I'm enjoying being the calm one on this.
Okay. Yeah. This is a major change, Charlie.
I'm being the arbiter.
You know how Cory Booker had his Spartacus moment? I'm having my Charlie Kirk moment.
Oh, okay.
So I want to go back to
reconciliation.
I want to go back to Bakari here because I think.
I thought you wanted. You want to jump in? We didn't want to mansplain everything to you.
But just even with the issue of abortion, I think, and this applies to most issues, it is very easy to see it as black and white. But even that whole dichotomy we have of pro-life versus pro-choice, that doesn't even fully encapsulate the range of political views that people believe.
Exactly.
Right? And there are so many things when it comes to specifically abortion that we can talk about. We can talk about how do we make sure that if people want to have adoption, that is easy and available for them? How do we make sure that people are aware of different contraceptive methods so we don't have the unplanned pregnancies in the first place?
Exactly.
Like we either kill all the babies or no one has, that's just, I don't think that's a very constructive way to look at the situation. And I mean, abortion, if there ever is one, people would think it's black and white, but it's really not.
So, can I get ahead? So Bakari, I'm going to do this as respectfully as possible, because if I didn't do this, I would regret it.
Preparing for this moment. Go. Let's go.
Can you tell by the shoes?
I don't even know what those are.
You don't know what those are?
Charlie, the shoes are irrelevant.
These are Yeezys.
Oh, excuse me.
Kanye West designed.
Guys, no, we're not going down that road.
I have to do this. On cable news, you said when Kanye West entered the Oval Office, this is what happens when black people don't read. Do you regret?
That's not what I said.
What did you say?
Well, let's actually, if we want to go back and actually...
No, I mean, the tape said this is what happens when black people don't
That's
read.
not what I said.
What did you say?
I actually said that this is a discussion, and my major issue with Kanye West is that he attempts to make anti-intellectualism cool. And what I said is that
You said this is what happens when black people
That's
don't
not
read.
what I said.
That's what the transcript
Actually, I said...
Charlie, please.
Charlie, do you want... You asked me a question, so I will answer.
I said, do you regret it?
So, no, I don't regret anything, Charlie. So this is the point.
So you
I said
it.
that's not what I said. If you want to know what I said, I'm attempting to tell you. I said that I have a problem with Kanye West because he attempts to make anti-intellectualism cool. I said there are many people who want to talk about criminal justice reform who will not send Kanye West to the White House to do that. I said Kanye West is what happens when Negroes don't read. You know what that is? That is a fact.
Oh, so, wait, so you did say it?
I said Kanye West is what happened when Negroes don't read.
That's
Correct.
what I just said.
No, that's not what you just said.
Do you think he's a genius?
Wait,
No,
I was...
time out. But time out. But time out.
He's a genius,
But time out.
Kanye?
Time out. Time out. Why? What is Kanye West? And I don't even know why we're here.
Because you said we need to have conversations about civility, and you go on cable news and say that a 7-time Grammy winner, multi-billionaire, courageous man going to the Oval Office is what happens when people don't read.
That's not what
You are a hypocrite. Don't tell me you're here to have a conversation.
Do you think Kanye's a genius? All right, I'm trying.
All right, so what we're going to do here is Bakari's
Don't give me that for a second.
Charlie.
But
Bakari's going to have a response.
Yeah,
Because you're trying to be this big reconciliation, we all gotta go along. Then you go on CNN and you bash a successful man that has the courage to wear a Make America Great Again hat. You deserve to be called out for that.
Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to come in here. So Bakari will have a response, and then we're going to move to another topic.
So personally, I love when we feign indignation. That's like the cutest thing ever. But on a much more specific note, first of all, it's factually accurate because Kanye West is literally a quoted non-reader. He doesn't believe in reading, okay? So that bothers me. But if we're going to have a conversation about criminal justice reform, I actually want somebody who is articulate on the issue of making sure that we ban for-profit prisons. I want somebody who wants to end the prohibition on marijuana. I want somebody who's going to actually go and talk about putting rehab and social programs in prisons so when people get out, we don't have high rates of recidivism. I want somebody who can actually talk about issues that are near and dear to my heart. And so while we want to feign this and say, oh my God, you said black people can't read, what I did was I directly quoted Chris Rock making a point about anti-intellectualism because I'm sick and tired of individuals who want to get in this discussion but do not have the depth to have it. You can have Kanye West, and you can trot him out. You can trot him out with the Make America Great hat on, but I don't stand on the shoulders of Kanye West, Charlie Kirk.
Okay, all right,
I stand, no. Let me finish. I stand on the shoulders of Walter Scott, of Trayvon Martin, of Keith Lamont Scott. I stand on the shoulders of all these people who were killed, of all these people,
Thomas Sowell or Condoleezza Rice or Dr. Ben Carson,
or criminals like Condoleezza.
One person, guys.
Of all of these individuals who were killed while unarmed, being African American, Sandra Bland, the list goes on and on again. So it's cool if you want to be indignant, right? It's cool if you want to have I got Bakari Sellers because, oh my God, he said Kanye West is what happens when Negroes don't read. I stand on that today and I'll stand on it tomorrow because I'm a man of conviction.
All right, I'm glad
we cleared that up.
All right.
Can I say something?
No. Lauren's going to come in.
Is Kanye a genius?
Yes,
guys.
Being a multi-billionaire and a 7-time Grammy winner is a form of genius.
Charlie.
Paris Hilton is rich. That doesn't make you a genius.
Guys.
There are many different forms of genius.
I would love to
see you
real quick.
multi-billion-dollar status, win
hold on,
multiple Grammys,
Charlie. This is
pop
the
culture
incentive
clout.
in our politics that's destructive. You guys are trying to get a Twitter moment right now, and that's not helping.
I don't want that. Exactly.
I am so sick of people saying they want kumbaya moments, and then you go on cable television and say someone like Kanye West, what happens when people don't read.
I just explained it.
I think
no, I know, but that's directed at the moderator. I'm happy to address Bakari with what he said.
I
think Lauren wanted to.
But she wanted to jump in.
Let's allow other people to get in.
I think you bring up some really good points, and unfortunately, we are living in a society that is celebrity obsessed, and people like Kanye West are who we are turning to for political ideas. It's not great, but here we are. He is someone who is obviously not some sort of political mastermind or philosopher king, but at the end of the day, at least he is trying to raise awareness about issues like prison reform. I would love it if it was someone else besides Kim Kardashian who was advocating for getting someone released who was in life prison for a non-violent
But that's not. But my only point is that I appreciate that. Well, I appreciate that effort, right? I appreciate the effort of Kim Kardashian going and getting one person out. I appreciate Kanye West being able to say the word prison reform. That's not what I'm talking about, though. Right. I'm talking about being able to go to the White House and represent people who look like me, okay?
Well,
and not only that, but speak to the...
black people.
But no. But I wish that was the case. Like, I wish it was the case that Kanye West could go and sit in the Oval Office and have a 15-minute rambling dialogue with the President of the United States and just speak for himself. That's not the point. He does not. He speaks for so many people who look like me, who are brown, who are black, who are persecuted, who are put upon. And so when we have that moment where somebody goes out there and embarrasses us,
Is that Kanye's West's fault that everyone else wants to play into identity politics and say that one black man speaks for all of you? He's never claimed to speak for anyone but himself.
And you know what? I appreciate that. I wholeheartedly appreciate that. However, that rhetoric it doesn't meet the test of reality. That's my only point. And listen, if you want to have a conversation, if Donald Trump wants to have a conversation about criminal justice reform, he can go out and talk to Michelle Alexander. He can talk to Jordan Edwards' mother, or who's Lucy McBath. He can talk to Sandra Bland's parents. He can talk to people who actually went through this. But pardoning one individual, or granting clemency to be accurate, to one individual is not reform. And all I'm simply saying is, if you want to trot Kanye West out, fine. If you want to wear Yeezys, fine. But my only point is, do not sit here and tell me you're dope and you're hype and you can do everything on criminal justice reform because you tout Kanye West.
Okay. So I'm going to bring in Michael here because criminal justice reform is an interesting area of left-right alignment right now. You've seen the Koch brothers, for example, get very active in trying to... Rand Paul, to try and reduce the prison population and reduce mandatory minimum sentences. Grover Norquist is very much involved in this. So Michael, I want to get your response to that. Do you agree with some of those voices like Norquist and the Koch brothers who want to reduce the huge budget line item that some of our corrections facilities have created?
I think we should put more criminals in prison. I see no reason to
So you disagree with them?
Yeah, I mean, I like Grover Norquist and I like the Koch brothers, but there was this wonderful headline in the New York Times a number of years ago by Fox Butterfield. It said, prisons keep filling despite the crime rate falling, as though there weren't some correlation between putting criminals in prison and the crime rate falling down. Are there certain instances where there's abuse? Absolutely. Should we reform that? Absolutely. I am all for putting criminals in prison. There are a lot of talking points on this issue. I think a lot of them are frivolous, particularly when it comes to the war on drugs. So I'm happy to talk about it, but probably that will lead us nowhere. On the question of is this country too harsh on its criminals or not, I think we're not harsh enough. I want a nice, safe country, and this has been a big win for President Trump. You know, we're talking about bridging divides and bringing people together on certain issues. When you, Bakari, talk about Kanye West not representing people who have your skin color, certainly you've seen the polls that show that President Trump's support among black voters and Hispanic voters has surged over the last year, more than doubled among black voters. Why is that? Because clearly people are feeling more represented by this administration. People are coming together, and I think what you're seeing right now with the hysteria, with the attacking Republicans in restaurants, is the last gasps of people who thought that it was theirs. They deserved power. Democrats deserved it. Hillary Clinton deserved to win the election, and it was wrongly taken away from her. I think it's absurd, and I'm very pleased that we're speaking frankly, because on the question of criminal justice reform, more broadly, when President Trump speaks about law and order, speaks about people not crossing our border illegally, using our resources illegally, deporting criminals who are in violation of the law, his poll numbers shoot through the roof, even among Democrats. Even Democrats don't want blanket amnesty. I think law and order is a big winner. I think our country's better off for it, and we should keep running on it. Bring everybody together.
If you actually care deeply about law and order, then I'd like for you to call for the breakup of the U.S.-Saudi alliance, because we keep giving them, we gave them over $100 billion in weapons, and they're using it to genocide kids in Yemen and kill journalists.
Charlie agrees on that.
If you agree, great. I'm happy.
Unbelievably vocal about how Saudi Arabia is the number one funder of terrorism.
Wonderful. And also, I want to agree with you on another point. You said we should put more criminals in jail. I agree that the fraudsters on Wall Street should all be in jail.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm not, just to respond to that bit, I'm not opposed to putting criminals behind bars, even if they work on Wall Street. Look, Wall Street often votes Democrats, so I've got no political allegiance to them as it is. As for the Saudi alliance, though, I find this to be a huge distraction from the Democrats. You're alluding, I suppose, to the extrajudicial killing of Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi government. Jamal Khashoggi was a radical Islamist. One of his main criticisms of Saudi Arabia was
can we just stop that? I mean, can the man rest in peace? So
law and order, unless he's a bad person,
this is why the title.
Let me finish.
I'm not, because this is why the title.
Well, I'm going to finish my point.
This is why the title of this panel is what it is.
Jamal Khashoggi was a radical Islamist from the 1980s who was good friends with Osama bin Laden.
So was
who
most
wept
of the
when bin
CIA.
Laden died. One of his main criticisms of the Saudi government is that the Saudi government is too pro-Israel.
But I'm not
willing to work with Israel.
I think
he's not a United States citizen.
I think
a lot of governments do a lot of bad things.
This is why
in particular are we focusing on this? It's because the Democrats can't find any issue to run on in the midterm election.
Remember,
I'm just going to say, I don't think there's...
Remember when you said you believed in due process like 5.5 minutes ago, and now you're cool with the killing of a journalist?
But I mean, like, I think that. But first of all, I think that.
Not you, him.
So when we get to the point where we have these, like, really bullshit, sensationalized talking points, we begin to lose people, right? And people clap and they chant and they scream. And this gentleman was a Washington Post editorial reporter, and if you want to talk about something he did in the 80s, so be it. But I'm not. That's fine. You can try to talk over me. That's fine. But my only point is that, like, he was killed in an extrajudicial killing in a consulate. I mean, let's at least allow him to rest and allow an investigation to happen.
I didn't bring it up.
But I think that, and I think my only point in stopping you and saying that we have to cut this bullshit out is because the audience and people deserve better dialogue than that, right?
I think it's pretty good dialogue, and it was brought up by
you guys. It's a sensationalized talking point when we can actually be talking about issues that maybe when we leave this room, somebody will say, oh, I'm thinking differently about this, other than simply saying that, oh my God, this was a Muslim sympathizer who just got killed.
An Islamist sympathizer. I want to point out, though, I didn't bring up the topic. My friend over here brought up the topic, and I'm happy to answer it. And this happens all the time. On the left, he talked about the U.S.-Saudi alliance. On the left, this always happens. The left brings up a talking point as an attack on the right. The right responds, and then they say, whoa,
it's not an attack. Charlie agreed with me.
Okay.
And nobody's attacked. I'm not attacking anybody.
Can I get in on the Saudi debate? This is something where Michael and I might have some disagreement.
We only disagree on like 3 things.
This might be one of them. I think Saudi Arabia is one of the great enemies of the West and of America. I'm sick and tired of appeasing them.
Yes.
15 out of 19 of the hijackers were Saudi Arabian. We should not be transacting hundreds of billions of dollars in arms sales to fund their unethical war, probably illegal war in Yemen.
Yes.
So here's where Michael and I will agree, and you might disagree. They're also the #1 funder of madrasas across the world, which is hotbed centers of radical Islam and terror cells. They end up being ISIS terrorists. And so I think the U.S.-Saudi relationship has gone way out of bounds, and they never paid a price for what they did at 9/11.
Yeah,
ever.
I agree with that.
They never paid a price for the worst terrorist attack, probably the worst domestic attack since 9/11, since Pearl Harbor. Yeah. On American soil in the last 100 years. So this is something we could agree on.
Totally agree.
And Khashoggi, I would actually agree with Michael that there's probably a little more coverage on this than would be usual. That's despite the point. But I think it's highlighting a broader context of how Saudi Arabia has been lying to us. We've been funding them. We've been giving them arms. We've allowed them to do whatever they want. And we have yet to fully allow the 9/11 victims' families to sue the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia, bankrupt that country, and make them pay those families for what they did on 9/11.
All right.
That's my stand.
Very good point.
We're going to move to a slightly different line of questioning here. We're here talking about some of the headlines. The fact is still, if you go beneath the headlines, we live in a very broken political system. And I want to get to some of those incentives primarily because we don't give them enough airtime, to be honest. It's often not as sexy. I think it's very important. And so actually, I do want to bring in Bakari for a second because you worked on the Obama campaign in 2008. And I think the last time there was an interest in trying to transcend a divide was that campaign. And Obama's famous words in 2004 was that there's not a liberal America, there's not a conservative America, there's the United States of America. And then at the end of his presidency, Vice News did this great documentary called A House Divided. And they asked him, well, what happened to that? And he said, well, that didn't work out so well, did it? And I'm thinking, wait, hold on. That was kind of the premise of why he ran and why he got elected. So I don't want to talk so much about like, oh, Republicans were obstructionists in Congress or Obama did this or not that. I want to get one layer deeper there and ask, what are the process issues that caused that mission to fail so spectacularly during his presidency?
Well, I mean, I think that even our discussion yesterday amongst my friends on the left, we have a tension about those policies and issues, and so it's pretty good if we don't maybe get caught up there, but delve to where you want to go. I began this earlier today by saying that in this country we've made a lot of progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. And one of the issues that I give Donald Trump credit for in somewhat of a backhanded way, that we are now actually having a discussion about robustly, is the issue of race. It's an issue in this country that we've never dealt with. It's one that we've never truly had any substantive conversation about. And people think that we are very far removed. I remind people often, my father was shot by South Carolina state troopers in February 8th, 1968, protesting a bowling alley. They denied his bond and housed him on death row. My sister was born without her father. My family, we had to literally live on welfare for a period of time because of the simple fact that my father had a felony on his record simply from being an activist, right? But this isn't something that happened in history books 100 years ago. This is one generation. And so I think a lot of the reaction that we had, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a great piece in The Atlantic called The First White President, and talking about Donald Trump and the angst that many people in this country have. And so I think that we are dealing with a reconciliation that I believe the year is 2042, correct me if I'm wrong, but 2042, when this will be a majority-minority country. And what we're dealing with now, a lot of what we're dealing with is the browning of America. And we're going to have some uncomfortability, and people are going to have issues. And I think a lot of that played out during the presidency of Barack Obama, but even more is playing out now. If Hillary Clinton was president, we wouldn't be having conversations like this. But because Donald Trump is, we're having these very profound discussions. And so that's a part of the reason that I believe we had those hiccups.
Yeah, right. All right, we have some questions here. We won't have time to get to everyone, but we hope to get a few. And can I just say one more thing? There needs to be a question mark at the end of the question. and please keep it relatively quick so we can get to as many people as possible.
So this question's mainly for Charlie and Kyle. How would you guys feel about the Libertarian Party and the Green Party sort of pooling their resources?
Want me to go? Okay, so I think it depends on the issue in question, because there are areas where you're going to find agreement between Greens and Libertarians. Like when we were talking about foreign policy and the drug war, there's total agreement there. So my whole thing has been, and that's, the whole point of this panel is how will we get along? My answer to that is very simple. When we do agree, we do get along, and we can work together on those issues, and I have no problem doing that. But where we don't agree, let's argue, let's debate, let's have that disagreement, and that's what democracy is. And sometimes it's messy, and we're going to be at each other's throats, metaphorically. And other times it's, great, and we can agree like we just did on Saudi Arabia. So I think when you're issues-based and policy-driven, I think that you'll find that there are many areas where you can agree and work together. And then when you have areas of disagreement, okay, just debate, and that's that, and may the best argument win.
It's very thoughtful.
And me being more of a civil libertarian, I wouldn't suggest the Green Party and Libertarian Party to converge. They would disagree.
No, not totally, of course not.
They would disagree on a lot of things.
Yeah, at least half the stuff.
But I would say that, and I'm libertarian on a lot of issues, traditionally conservative on other ones, but the best thing that's happened in the last 8 years is seeing libertarians finally admit that this Libertarian Party idea has to be within the Republican Party. You see Rand Paul, you see Thomas Massie, Justin Amash, and you see conversations at even the top level where Republican leadership are talking more like libertarians on issues, which is a great thing. Talking about disdain for government power and even government overreach, all those sorts of things are very positive developments, and that's happened since the Tea Party movement. But again, I think that there's things that we can agree on, and obviously things we'll fundamentally disagree on, and civil libertarian issues, I think, is a good starting point.
It is, definitely. All right, next question.
Hi, I asked a similar question to Ann Coulter, and I wanted to get your take, Charlie. When we see numbers like Democratic senators representing 35 million more Americans, but are in the minority in the House, Democrats represent 1.37 million more people, but Republicans have 33 more seats, and 3 million more people voted for Hillary, but Trump is president. You seem to agree that districting shouldn't be politicized. Can we count on you and other conservatives to reform a system that supports them?
So yes, but I'll take a little exception with what you said first. The premise of what you said, though, is operating under the idea that we are a democracy. We are not a democracy in America, nor should we ever become a direct democracy. We are a constitutional republic that use a democratic process to put our representatives in power. And there's a big difference to that. A democracy, as warned in the Federalist Papers, would have lended itself to the tyranny of the majority. Decentralization of power and states' rights is essential to a republic. Remember, the states created the federal government did not create the states. And so the diffusion of power to give states such as Wyoming and Montana, North to South Dakota, representation is critical. Now, it works for both parties, too. Remember, it's Democrats that get electoral votes from Hawaii and Rhode Island and small states, so it's not a purely partisan thing. The final thing to say is this: I think it's very dangerous to go to, for example, a direct national vote, because you'll see candidates do nothing, go from cities like Miami to Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and concentrate on heavily urban issues and forget middle of America, which is essentially everywhere between Manhattan and Malibu.
So we have our first disagreement. We're a constitutional republic, but we're also literally a representative democracy. So obviously democracy is a very important part of our system. And I think we should absolutely abolish the Electoral College, because you have to do mental gymnastics to come to the conclusion that, you know, the people that should be in power are the ones who got fewer votes. I think anything that would argue on the opposite side of that is honestly laughable.
I actually disagree with you, but
well, it's because the whole idea.
I was like, actually,
it's fine.
You know, being from South Carolina, I think the Electoral College is like dope, right? Because why else would you not? Well, I mean, what candidate would come campaign in South Carolina?
Exactly.
If all you had to do was go to New York and L.A.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, the
and
way.
not only that, but I'm so sorry. One last quick point, because a lot of my friends on the left after this election that Hillary won in the popular vote, however you want to couch it. I'm like, the Electoral College, first of all, you can't name a better system, one. And two, we were just championing it in 2008 when it elected a skinny black guy with a funny name. So, like, I'm
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's a matter of principle, in my opinion, that I actually think, I'd go beyond that. I would actually say, in this country, on the top, you know, most important 5 or 10 issues, I think every year our entire country should go to the polls and vote on the 5 or 10 most important issues. So, for example, if one of those was ending the Iraq War, I think this country would be in a much better position if people got to directly vote on should we legalize marijuana, should we end the Iraq War.
But stuff like marijuana, you are able to directly vote for your state legislature, and that is like essentially direct democracy. There's no like electoral college for your state legislature where a lot of things like drugs are related to, as they should be to the states. But the bigger idea, and this is coming from a Canadian, is that it's states who elect the president, not individual people. So I think the whole balance with the states being semi-sovereign entities that are able to like sort of have the I guess lab experiment of smaller issues. I think that is important.
So if you told me, well then let's compromise and find the middle ground and let's have more of a direct democracy on specific issues in the individual states,
we have that.
I would take that agreement.
Yeah, I would.
I'd take that agreement.
California has that. There's ballot referendums every 2 years.
Yes. So I live in New York and we don't have many ballot referendums.
I don't think you can change that in the state, though. That's what makes the laboratories a democracy.
I'm a little hesitant about the whole states' rights thing. There was a war that was fought over that. Kind of happy.
All right,
I would prefer it at the national
All
level.
right, this is enough of
I
that.
would,
All right,
I would
next
agree
question.
with that. Bring the issues to the states, let the people vote in the states.
Okay, next question.
Mr. Sellers, you said you don't stand on the shoulders of people who don't read.
That's not what I said, but go ahead.
I'm pretty sure it was. But then you proceeded to say that you stand on the shoulders of various blacks that have died for various reasons. Do you really believe that these blacks whose names you listed were avid readers?
Yes, Martin Luther King was an avid reader.
He didn't say Martin Luther King. He
that was like a next question. You want me to answer, do I believe that young black men who are unarmed and killed actually read? The answer to the question is yes.
Yeah.
They actually read, because it's not a fucking big deal to see a black kid read a book, so I don't want to answer the question.
Next question.
I heard you say like James Baldwin too.
That was another question.
Hey, this question's for you, Kyle.
This is for you, Kyle. Seltzer water
How's it
drinker.
going, buddy?
Good, man. Big fan.
Thanks, man.
Okay, I'm a history buff, studied the Civil War, and also been studying politics, especially from you. And it seems like we're still even though the civil hot war is over, it seems like we're still debating over ideology, and it seems like we're still in this, what I like to call civil Cold War. So what kind of policies and legislation should we do to end the civil Cold War?
So what should we do to end the civil Cold War? Honestly,
best question of the day.
Yeah.
That's great.
Asking better questions than you.
Exactly. I know. I agree.
I think the only thing we could do is have conversations like we're having right now. And as you could tell, at times it was heated and we disagreed, but then at other times there were points of agreement. And you know, one of the other points that I was going to make during the course of the panel was that I said that a lot of Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric was stuff that I agreed with. Like, for example, when he would bash NAFTA at every rally, and he said, okay, this is destroying, you know, working people in this country, and we need to fix it, and we need to stop doing these terrible trade deals. And I think that the way you bridge that divide is by, again, being issues-driven, because when you're issues-driven, you will find points of agreement, whereas opposed to if you're just a partisan hack, you're going to just be a partisan hack, and even if you contradict yourself on an issue, you'll say, I don't care, I agree with the Republican because I'm a Republican, and that makes no sense. Too. Democrats do it too, yes, of course. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Great question, bro.
Good one.
Quick, yeah, so since this is supposed to be how do we get along, right? My question is for Bakuri.
Like Bacardi without the D.
Sorry. I've never done this before, but affirmative action. What's your opinion on that? Because I, as a white male, applied for a job in a predominantly black neighborhood, and they have stipulations. They have to hire so many black people versus the minority, whatever the demographics are. Is that fair? I mean, like,
so first, I think we need to back up and actually just deal with facts. The number one group of individuals that benefit from affirmative action in this country are actually white women. So that's actually first, and that's the first thing that I would tell you. I think that for a long period of time, I often tell people that I can't make you dance, but you know, I do think it's necessary that everybody have access to the dance floor. And when you're talking about, when you're talking about legacy enrollment, and you're talking about higher education, you're talking about jobs, what affirmative action has done was simply allow individuals who otherwise would not have had the opportunity to compete. But the largest group of individuals in this country who have taken advantage of affirmative action programs are not blacks, or not Hispanics, but they're actually white women.
Do you think that there is a time when, after all the great gains that affirmative action has made, that we should get rid of it? Now there are these suits against Harvard and Yale for discriminating against Asian students. Is there a time at which we should phase out affirmative action, and when do you see that happening? Is there a time? The answer would be probably yes. When do I see that happening? I'm not sure.
Could I, as in sort of white woman, weigh in? I
like
think,
taupe,
yeah,
beige.
Like midway. So I think the issue with affirmative action, and you know, I'm someone who I very much believe in meritocracy, but even though I don't support the idea of affirmative action, I think the people who do are addressing a real problem, which is that there is a big the lack of representation among certain groups in positions of power in higher education. I think we need to be focusing more on why that is, and I think that goes back to let's talk about public schools in neighborhoods where they just simply don't have the funds and where the high school graduation rate is extremely low. Let's talk about trying to bring skills into these communities. Let's talk about, instead of just throwing everyone in prison, let's talk about treatment programs for things like that. And I think if we begin to address the problem from that issue, then the whole debate about affirmative action might not be as huge as it is now.
You actually hit the nail on the head, because you're talking about a holistic approach.
Right.
And I think that a lot of times we piecemeal, because people want to ask you, how do you feel about affirmative action? Well, affirmative action is what some people is a remedy to a large problem, but it's only part of that.
Exactly.
And so I think that we have to, as you said, we have to look at the fact that African American kids have less access to 4-year-old kindergarten programs. They're more likely to go to school hungry. They're more likely to have issues that lead to pre-existing, or not pre-existing, everybody wants to talk about pre-existing, but preventable diseases.
Right,
like
even things like prenatal nutrition is a huge discrepancy.
So I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Look at that.
We're agreeing too much, man.
Very quick.
Answer. I appreciate that.
Well, but
yeah, very quick.
You said affirmative action is a remedy. Well, it's also a punishment against Asian American students that do quite well. It's racism against Asian Americans. Harvard has a different, I know this might be a surprise.
Yeah, you're hitting me with something new here, so tell me, teach me.
Yeah, so the Ivy League has a different grading scale for an Asian American student versus a black student versus a white student. It is harder to get into the Ivy League schools as an Asian American student than any other race or box that you check. That is pure and simple racism to have different levels for different races. And you call it a remedy, it's a punishment against an entire portion of the American population that is about 8 to 10%, based on the census data that's about to come out, we'll find out, that happens to be the richest group in America. Asian Americans are the richest group by race in America, and they weren't in the 1940s, yet over the last 70 to 80 years, they did the 3 things you need to do to stay out of poverty in America, as the great Ben Shapiro talks about every single day. You need to graduate high school, get a job, and get married before you have kids. They've done those things over the last 60 years, and now we're punishing them in the college admissions process.
So we need to be specific, though, because it actually depends on which group of Asians you're talking about, because typically when they came from lower income nations, they stayed lower income, whereas when they came from richer families, so for example, Vietnamese immigrants are actually more poor than, say, Chinese immigrants. So I think we have to be very specific, because when you make a generalization like, oh, you know, basically they just have family values and that's why they're doing better, that's a cheap...
They'd probably be richer if they got into Harvard and Yale.
What's that? You could say the same for everything. You could say, for example, immigrants from South Africa are considered African Americans. They tend to be richer than African Americans that have been in America for 150 years to multi-generation. Sure. So you have to use the aggregate of the data that
That's
we have.
what I'm saying, of course.
And in the aggregate, the Asian Americans are the richest group in America per race, and affirmative action heavily punishes this portion of the American population that has higher test scores, higher graduation rates, and is.
Well, I mean, I think that the resolve to that conundrum is, I think that, because I wasn't aware of that, but I think that if you're talking about the Harvards and the Yales and you're talking about Ivy League institutions, then the answer is not to throw out affirmative action. The answer is to reform the programs, right, and maybe equalize those grading systems. And the reasons I say that it's not, but the reasons I'm saying that you shouldn't throw out affirmative action is because there was just a recent study that came out that said that if you take an African American today and you equalize his wealth or his income potential and earning potential with his white counterparts, it'd take them 222 years to equal the amount of wealth that they have, right? And so you're looking at a group of individuals who have been disenfranchised in this country for a very long period of time. And so affirmative action, to her point, is just one slither of a larger holistic approach that we have to take.
Just out of curiosity,
but I don't even know where we got this rabbit hole. But yeah,
just real quick, I'm very curious as to your answer on this. What do you think of a class-based affirmative action system?
No, I don't believe it's government's role to solve any sort of inequities. Freedom, opportunity, and scale.
I was curious.
It's not government's role to socially engineer.
Guys, let's get to the next question.
Hi, this is a question for Mr. Kirk. Isn't it hypocritical for you to virtue signal about Candace Owens, then shit all over Taylor Swift? So how the fuck are we supposed to get along?
You mean Kanye West, but yeah. Thank you for your
he used a lot of
what he's talking about. I mean, I'm going to give him more benefit of the doubt in his own question than he probably deserves. But so I gave Kanye West a lot of praise, and then I simultaneously bashed Taylor Swift, of which I stand by completely. So let me give a short answer because I don't want to monopolize the panel on this. First and foremost, Kanye West did not demonize Hillary Clinton. He did not demonize the Democrats. He even said, "I love Hillary." And Taylor Swift's post that she wrote on her Instagram, of which I highly doubt she actually wrote, and I got a lot of blowback for that, but that's okay. It was probably written by a Democrat political consultant. She said, "Marsha Blackburn is anti-woman. Marsha Blackburn is this." She went out of her way to attack the Democrat. Where Kanye West's message is, not all black people have to be Democrats. That's what the first thing he said when he entered the Oval Office, to distinctly different political analysis.
Okay, yes. Well, first of all,
I
didn't think I'd be defending Taylor Swift.
I'm a Swiftie, so yeah.
The reason she said she's anti-woman is because she voted against the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. So it's fair to categorize that as an anti-woman vote.
Okay, but she also championed over 8 bills that went after domestic abuse perpetrator, so on and so forth. So to say that Marsha Blackburn, a woman, is anti-woman does not look at her total and complete record.
Of course okay, let's not be
Kyle,
silly. Of course it's possible to be part of a group and be against their broader interests.
Right, but again, to say Marsha Blackburn is anti-woman when her whole track record, her whole life is about female empowerment in the good old boys network of the Republican-run party of Tennessee, I think is disingenuous for Taylor Swift and shows that she obviously does not have an understanding of Marsha Blackburn's 20-plus years in public service.
If you vote against the Violence Against Women Act, you're anti-woman. Next.
All right, next. All right.
Why are we debating that?
All right.
Again, she voted for many other bills that were a better version of that, but that's okay. We'll talk about that.
Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
as Catholics and seeing that you support that the government's job is to protect life, why would you support recourse to the death penalty when prison technology has advanced to the point where we can protect the citizenry from dangerous criminals without putting them to death?
Perhaps we can and perhaps we can't. My view on the death penalty is you were talking about a Catholic question, is in keeping with 2 millennia of Catholic theology, although there is now some question about that raised by the present Vicar of Christ on earth. But we can, another time and another place on that. There are different reasons to use punishment. You can use punishment to be rehabilitative, you can use punishment to be punitive, you can use punishment to protect the public from the criminal, all of which I think are perfectly licit. Obviously, throughout Scripture, St. Paul writes about how the civil authority has the right to come down on people, and many doctors of the church and many people from the patristic era also wrote about this. Okay. Why should we do it? It's because justice is very important, and there are bad incentives that go down the line when you stop punishing people for heinous crimes. It's very easy to sit here and say, oh, I oppose the death penalty for all cases. What about some awful terrorist who kills 3,000 people one sunny morning? What about somebody who commits awful crimes, rape, murder? Why wouldn't we attack those people? Why wouldn't we punish those people? I don't really see the argument. Obviously, we should protect human life, but people can compromise their own rights. And if you commit a heinous crime that would leave society better off without you, I don't see any reason not to punish that. And my final point is that there is a medicinal benefit to capital punishment, which is, to quote Dr. Johnson, hanging concentrates the mind. Depend upon it, sir, when you know you're to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates your mind wonderfully. So I think there's a spiritual and a medicinal benefit to it, and I highly recommend that Catholics around the world embrace it again.
We're out of time, but very quick. I'm a conservative against the death penalty, and I'm going to give you the conservative reason why I'm against the death penalty. First and foremost, I think it's wrong the amount of people that we have brought to the death penalty chair that were wrongfully accused, and I think that's horrible. I love you, Michael, but I'm gonna
there are issues with the justice
Number
system.
two, ironically, it's actually more expensive. It's actually more expensive than life in prison because of the appeals and because of the amount of legal jargon around how long it takes to actually get someone to the death penalty chair. It's almost 10 times more expensive. The third thing I say is this. If I'm against government power domestically for the rights of American citizens, and it's different obviously for foreign nationals, then I think that we should be consistent in protecting the life of the unborn, even the life of the people that have done horrifically heinous crimes. Obviously give them 50 life sentences, no chance to bail, and never allow them the light of day. But I think we as conservatives need to be consistent in how we say, well, we should be protecting the life of all people, no matter how difficult it might be, saying, yes, we want to see that person perish. That's where our principles take the most amount of courage to stand for. So Michael and I will disagree with that. But I will say this in closing, where I'll put my counterparts on the left, the amount of focus the left puts on the death penalty and saying, oh, we should not execute them, and then they turn a blind eye on the millions of people in the womb, that's the other thing I think that's a little hypocritical. So I will say I'm consistent from the womb to the tomb. I'm pro-life all the way through.
I think that's a nuanced conversation we can have when it comes to that issue, but my final point will be this.
Very quickly, Kyle.
I think that people who are pro-life should go even beyond being consistent to your extent and argue against the bombing of 8 countries that we're currently doing right now.
All right. So
he wants us to stop bombing all those countries that Obama started wars in.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
So first of all, I just want to thank all of our panelists. This has been a lively conversation. And I think I'll just close with 2 points. First, on the topic of political divisions, this was a topic that the founders very much warned us of. And I would look to what George Washington said in his farewell address. He said, in these times of extreme partisanship, our country becomes vulnerable to foreign corruption and influence and creates fertile ground for authoritarian tendencies. And I think these political divisions we have in our country is really the challenge of our time. And it's not to say that we all need to agree all the time, but we need to have better arguments. We need to have better conversations. And that's why I'm grateful to our panelists here. And the last thing I'll say that makes me optimistic is when you look at the millennial demographic right now, if you look at the data, we tend to be much more issue-focused than party-focused. And if we can have more of a dialogue around that, we might have a better republic in the future. So thank you all very much, and thank you to our panelists. Give them a big round of applause.
A big round of applause for Stephen Olakara, Bakari Sellers,
Scotty Neal Hughes at 4.
Yeah, I need to follow too. Thank
Scotty
you.
Neal Hughes at 4.
Michael Knowles and Lauren
Thank
Chen.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
That was great.
Had a good time.
Hey, thank you. That was fantastic.
you. Great job, man.
Well, we got to go.
I think we're still on. I think we're still on the live mic here.
Anything that's bad.